College football playoff rankings, there you go. They're final. There's a lot of talk out there about whether the playoff committee got this right, whether the playoff committee got this wrong. I'm going to suggest to you the playoff committee could not get it right. They were incapable of it, not because they're stupid or ignorant or know nothing about football. It's because they were put in a no-win situation with the format that they have to deal with. I've been calling this for a year or longer. I don't think you had to wait until the results were final to see this coming. I don't think you had to see the field work itself out before you understood the auto bid in college football as a practice is a very flawed concept. The auto bid, 98% of you know what that is. But all I'm talking about is the fact that Boise State has a first round bye. Boise State is ranked 9th in the college football playoff rankings, but they're all of a sudden number 3 in the bracket. Why is that? Well, because they won a conference. I guess we just think all conferences are equal. Therefore, if you win one, you're thrown in the same barrel as the winner of the SEC or the Big Ten or the ACC, and the 4 highest ranked amongst you gets a bye. It's dumb. It always was going to be dumb. But I think it took until this playoff iteration to realize, oh, that doesn't just impact who gets a bye, that impacts things downstream as well. So I'm going to suggest to you, as I throw out several thoughts here, we don't have a rankings problem so much this year as we have a format issue this year and at least next year before they address this thing. A lot of talk about Alabama. Alabama got left out of the playoff. A lot of talk about whether they should have been in. Well, I didn't really care either way. I was sort of indifferent because I thought the die was cast last week. So the die being cast last week was on Tuesday night when that committee ranked SMU ahead of Alabama. That rendered every resume argument moot. They played last night in Charlotte, the SMU Mustangs did, and they played Clemson, played them close. I was of the opinion that SMU, based on the committees ranking them ahead of Alabama last week, should not drop behind Alabama. Guys, I thought that even if SMU lost by 3 touchdowns, they shouldn't drop behind Alabama. There's the yelling. You didn't hear what I said. I know the audience. I know you guys very well, especially my Bama folks. A lot of you just screamed, "What are you talking about? Shouldn't be behind us." If SMU got blown out, that proves they're not a better team than us. That's not what this is about. If it was about who the better team was, Bama would be in a mile above you. It's not, or a mile above SMU. It's not about that. We long ago created this to be anything other than that. What I said was, because they were ranked ahead of you already, the committee had already looked at your resume compared to theirs. The committee had already seen how many more top 25 wins you have. The committee had already seen relative strength of schedule comparison. It had already seen all of this, and they ranked them ahead of you. The only thing that was going to change from last Tuesday to today was they were going to play an extra game. It was a conference title game. And I don't think that you should fall if you're placed above a team because you play in a game that they didn't earn the right to play in. Bama didn't play in the SEC championship game. They could have. They completely sliced their own tires against Oklahoma in Norman a few weeks back. That cost them. Bama screwed Bama. A whole lot more than that committee screwed Bama. You don't get to lose a third game. You don't lose a quarter of your games and start yelling to me about how much you got screwed, knowing full well in years past you're not even in the top 10 when we used to have a 2-team or a 4-team format. So I'm not going to cry giant crocodile tears all over my set because you were 11th or 12th or 13th. I don't care because I didn't want this thing expanded. But it did get expanded. So then I'm telling you, SMU, given where they were ranked last week, that's one thing. I didn't think that they should drop behind Bama, and they didn't. Now, how I thought it should be is a totally different story. I would have ranked them completely different last week. See, I would have had Alabama ahead of SMU last week. Then, if I'm a committee of one, I'd have myself a real healthy argument. SMU played Clemson close. I had them behind Bama last week. Was that effort enough to jump them over Bama? Why did I have a 1-loss team behind a 3-loss team? Because I respect Alabama's strength of schedule that much more. That's what it would have sounded like if I was on the committee. But I'm not on the committee. So they really cast the die last Tuesday, and that was that. I wasn't surprised by that. Here's the problem. The problem is I had a buddy text me earlier today who does not like Alabama, and he was screenshotting. He screenshot a number of people that were complaining that Bama didn't get in. And he said, look at these people. I'm telling all of them, it's not the committee's fault you weren't one of the 12 best teams in the country. You can have your fun with Bama fans. You need to understand you're wrong when you say they weren't one of the 12 best teams in the country. Well, by what criteria, Josh? Your JP poll? No. Well, by what? Vegas? No. Although both of those entities would place Bama in the top 12. No, I don't need you to look any further than, no, I don't know, the college football playoff rankings. Well, that's preposterous. The playoff committee didn't put Bama in the field. That means they're not one of the 12 best teams in the country. No. It means they weren't one of the best 12 as the format dictates it to be. I'm looking at the rankings right here. The final playoff rankings. Alabama's number 11. Alabama missed out, not because they're not one of the 12 best teams in the country, they missed out because of format. Because the format is jacked up. The format, in other words, dictates that number 16, because that's where Clemson finished, even with an ACC title win, number 16 had to get vaulted up. Why? Because they won a conference championship. Doesn't matter that they lost a quarter of their games. Doesn't matter that they lost at home to South Carolina and tripped their way into an ACC championship game. It doesn't matter that they play in an inferior conference and therefore they were able to win it last night. None of that matters. It's just every conference is equal. If you win one, pole vault yourself in. It's a messed up format. It's a messed up format. I will present several exhibits of that for you. The next one, to be clear, I ain't upset Bama got left out because their fate was in their hands and they screwed it up 9 ways from Sunday. I'm not here to really listen to any complaints from Alabama folks, although if I were on the committee, I would have my own rules and they would probably be in. Moving on. What did we do in Indianapolis last night? We played the Big Ten championship game, but what did we really do? Why did we do it? I assume we did it to crown a conference champ, and we did that. Congrats to Oregon. I'll talk about it later in the show. But really, in terms of the college football playoff process, what did we do? What we did was we watched the winning team get set up to have the toughest of all the second-round games, like we predicted, 5 days ago. And then we watched the losing team, that'd be Penn State right there if you're watching on your screen, get set up with the most advantageous position imaginable. I didn't get that backwards. If you're new to this, maybe if you're someone's girlfriend and you're faintly listening in the background as your guy listens to the show, you didn't hear me wrong, ma'am. That's the way the powers that be that run this sport ran it straight into a ditch format-wise when it comes to the playoff. Penn State, because they lost a conference championship game. It's not their fault, by the way. I ain't hating on Penn State. I'm just saying they, as their punishment, they will play SMU in 15-degree weather in Pennsylvania in a couple of weeks. They will be favored by over a touchdown. They already are. We've got the lines now. If they win that game, you know what they do next round? They don't go and play a high-caliber SEC or Big Ten team. They go play Boise State, who they will be nearly a 2-touchdown favorite against in the second round. Why is that? Because Boise's got a first-round bye. Why does Boise have a first-round bye? Well, because they're one of the 4 highest-ranked conference champions. And they built a format where the only teams that get first-round byes are conference champs. It's not a Penn State issue. It's not a Big Ten issue. It's a format issue. The playoff committee had no choice on this. They had no choice but to put conference champs up there. That was dictated to them. It's not a committee problem. It is a rules for the committee problem. And so you quickly see how it's not just an issue that Boise plays in an inferior conference and hat tip to them, man. Great season, but they get a first round bye. It's not just that. It's what happens downstream. Now you're rewarding a loser of a conference championship game above and beyond the winner. Oregon got to take the conference title home last night, and that's wonderful. You can't take it away from them. They're about to draw the winner of Tennessee-Ohio State in the second round. Penn State, they got to play an extra game. I'm not discounting that. I'm baking that into my philosophy on this. Penn State will be favored by a touchdown at home in freezing cold weather against a team from Dallas, and then they'll go and they'll play a team in a neutral site who they'll be a double-digit favorite against. And I'll tell you, to look a step further, which is dangerous to do with Penn State football, to look a step further, the 3 potential teams they could draw in the third round, they got a better roster than one of them. They got a comparable roster to the second one in Notre Dame, and Georgia may not have their starting quarterback. So that's Penn State's punishment for losing a conference title game. SEC bias, man. Oh, wait. A lot of people I made that as a joke because I want to circle back. I know the allegations that surround this channel, so I'll play into it at this point. The SEC thing. I know a lot of you are very happy that the SEC had several teams left on the outside looking in here. Bama's on the outside, South Carolina's on the outside, Ole Miss is on the outside. I can tell you there was a lot of very, very public clapping and very, very public dunking, double barrel middle fingers. And then there was the text messages that I got from people in football, in some cases in the playoff, ultra relieved that the Ole Miss Rebels are not in it. Specifically Ole Miss. Apparently a lot of folks felt the same way I did about Ole Miss. Did they trip up and fall against Kentucky? Yup. Did they trip up and fall against Florida? Sure did. That doesn't change the fact that when they flex, they can do what they did to Georgia. Aren't many other teams in this playoff field that can do that. Ole Miss could do that. A lot of other coaches in this thing knew that. So they're very glad those teams got left out. I just want to ask you if you're happy with the result today. Do you really believe it's a proper format, or are you just happy the SEC kind of got left out? Because if you're the latter, that's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of healthy joy to be taken in the idea that the big bad SEC got 3 of its member institutions, door slammed on their nose. Ouch, it may be broken. I know that's fun to think about. Do you really think that the format is best suited to crown a national champion by pitting the best teams in the country against each other, or most deserving? You can insert whichever word you want to there. Do you believe the format is sound, or do you just happen to temporarily like it this year because Bama got screwed, or Ole Miss, or South Carolina, the SEC got screwed? You're picturing Greg Sankey with steam coming out of his ears. I'd suggest to you 2 things. The SEC will get the last laugh on this. Come hell or high water, the SEC will get the last laugh. Maybe not this year, but down the road they will. And number 2, it may be you that gets victimized by a completely jacked up format in the future. So just remember Justin Timberlake, that college football song he's saying, what goes around comes around. It could happen to you down the road. And don't say you won't complain, because you know good and well you will. The SEC ended up underrated somehow. This is where it's going to get really good. I think they ended up underrated. I think the situation in the SEC this year was this. It was still a pretty deep conference. It was an ultra competitive conference. There was a lot of talent, as there usually is in the conference. There were no elite teams. In any other conference, that'd be okay. In the SEC, that's a death sentence, because that just means cannibalism. That just means everyone's going to eat everyone up. That means the stuff they normally say about the SEC league schedule is actually going to happen. Because if you were that way and you were in the ACC, you would be Miami. You would be Clemson. You would be knocking on the door. You may even get in the thing. But you would have your occasional Wake Forest. You would have your Dukes on the schedule. In the SEC, even Vandy bit some people this year. But I'm talking about the top there. I'm talking about Texas. I'm talking about South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia had a couple of losses, Ole Miss, Bama. There is no elite team. And most of them ended up playing each other. And what happened is a bunch of folks got losses, and then they beat someone else, and then the whole round robin happened with the cannibalization of the SEC schedule, which is sometimes a propagandist talking point. This year, I actually thought it was true. I thought we had a whole lot of B-tier SEC teams with no A-tier team. None of them. What that ended up doing was it ended up recalibrating people's view of the conference, and they thought to themselves, okay, well, most years we would have a Georgia or an Alabama and an LSU, and they're like elite, and then maybe one more team. But this year, what you did is you said, okay, well, if this year, if the Alabama or Georgia elite this year is Texas, and then the next one is Georgia, then there's not a lot of depth in this conference. No, actually what you had was you had no 2020 Bama, no 2019 LSU, not even close. But what you had is you had about 4 or 5 teams that were a level below, and you don't compare these teams to those vintage teams. You compare these teams to the world they exist in. And the world they exist in, if strength of schedule was properly calibrated, would probably have all of them inside the top 12. It's not the way it works. I don't make the format. I'm just, I'm a believer that, if anything, with all the talk about the SEC in the abstract, like in the macro. At the micro level, I think a lot of these teams ended up getting underrated. Not Bama. Ironically, I think Bama's probably properly rated. I think Ole Miss ended up getting underrated, and I think South Carolina ended up getting underrated. I mean, imagine South Carolina folks sitting there last night watching Clemson, whose house they just went into and won, trip their way into an ACC championship game. They win it, they go to the playoff. And then some folks in Clemson had the nerve to dunk on my friends in South Carolina. The audacity. So earlier today, I took to the most scientifically sound platform that I know of, my Twitter account, and I put out a poll. I actually want to pull it up right now because I want to be as scientific as possible. So I'm looking around right now. Oh, look at these results. We got 10,000 votes. That's good. So I'm looking around at these results. And I'm looking around at the transfer portal, and I'm looking around at just everything about college football. It has been my theory for a long time that college football was never better than it was yesterday, and then tomorrow we'll say the same, and then the next day we'll say the same. I haven't particularly loved the direction the sport has gone. Some people vehemently disagree with me on that. There are some people who believe college football has never been better. I disagree with them. It's still great, still the greatest sport on the planet, but I think a lot of the moves that have been made have been counter to what I specifically love about college football. I put out a poll today, and it read simply this: which overall structure of college football do you prefer? All encompassing, okay? 2024 or 2004? Not just the playoff, everything. 2004 is leading 55-45. Does that surprise you at all? Most people who are vocal about this, they brag about and love the expanded playoff. They brag about and love the transfer portal. They talk about how it's evened out the competitive balance. In many cases, they're right about that. But it's come with a big price tag, I think. And this is not to cast judgment or aspersions or anything, because we're in version 1 of the playoff. So we don't know how this is going to feel in 3 years. I will admit that to you, even as I didn't like it. I am willing to wait and see. I am not in love at all with the format. In fact, I think you'd have a supermajority that would agree the format's got to change. Even if you do nothing more than reseed after round 1, the format's got to change. But I think it is interesting that more and more people, and I guarantee you some of those people were fans of the new direction of college football. I've noticed more and more people these days are coming up for air, and they're looking around and they're saying, you know, I thought all these changes would take the sport one direction. It doesn't feel like it's going the direction I thought it would go. In retrospect, I kind of miss the days where it was much harder to win a national championship, but the national championship wasn't the end-all be-all either. The postseason wasn't even the end-all be-all. It meant something to go to the Outback Bowl. If I expected my team to win 6 games and they won 9, and I played on a New Year's Day in Orlando or Tampa, I wasn't playing for a national title. But all my players were opted in because they hadn't been told it's a meaningless bowl game. And I was kind of happy. Go down there, get a mild sunburn, go back up to Madison, I'm happy. Now it's everything that is meaning in college football has to be derived from playoff implications. And I think a lot of folks look around and say, was that really worth it? Hey man, I wanted an expanded playoff, but is it really worth it? Conference championships yesterday were interesting. I had some mixed reactions. I was not in Atlanta, I was in Dallas, but some folks at the SEC championship game texted me early on and said, this kind of has an exhibition game feel to it. Now, it was an intense game. Thing went to overtime, and I don't think you'll ever fully strip away the meaning or the intensity of the SEC championship game. But imagine telling everyone in Indianapolis last night that the loser of this game is going to get the draw Penn State got, and the winner is going to get the draw Oregon got. Imagine how people would have viewed the game. Imagine how the coaches and players would have viewed the game. I'm just really fascinated to see what version 2, version 3, and version 4 of this playoff is in the coming years, because it's trial and error. I don't put it past the people who run this thing to look at it, do a healthy assessment of it, and to tweak it. That's what you do with these sorts of things. Do you tear it down or do you just tweak it? Because I can promise you, not that I have to speak to them personally, I can promise you the folks around the SEC, whether it makes you happy or sad, the folks around the SEC are not going to sit around knowing the investment they have in football, knowing that they just did what they always do. This year, I think they signed 58 of the top 100 players in the country, just that conference alone. It's more than the rest of the P4 combined. Most of the premier talent is in the SEC. The highest paid staffs mostly are in the SEC. The biggest venues, the most rabid environments mostly in the SEC. And they look around and they say, hold up. People think 9-3 down here is just 9-3? People think you are what your record says you are. There's no way. That is the overwhelming sentiment around the SEC, whether you agree with it or not. But they have the power and stroke to change this fundamentally. And they're going to. And I think there's a school of thought that I happen to believe that they already had the solution. They just needed to find the problem. The solution that a lot of them want is to head to that world that's much akin to the AFC versus NFC, only it's SEC versus Big Ten. A lot of them want to head towards that world. A lot of them at the very least want to head to a postseason format where they're guaranteed a certain number of seats at the table, which you would think I'd support. I don't. When I tell you I don't want any automatic bid, I mean including the SEC. None of them should have guaranteed spots, but they want them, and they're going to get them. The Big Ten will as well. They are going to get them. This right here will just serve as precedent down the road for them to say, we did not go all in on this so that, all due respect, Boise State and Arizona State can be given first round byes. We did not go all in on this so that a 3-loss ACC team, because they played in the ACC, got an auto bid by winning their inferior conference championship. Meanwhile, we got Ole Miss and South Carolina and Bama sitting at home. That's their mentality, and they will get changed based on this. So enjoy it while you can, I guess. I have no clue what it's going to look like. I have a sneaking suspicion it doesn't look like this very long.